Welcome to Anti-Aging Insights, where age is a state of mind and aging is a treatable condition. And now, here is your host, Dr. Teri Fisher.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Anti-Aging Insights podcast. Today, in honor of the fact that we are entering summer, we're going to talk about sunscreen and the importance of sunscreen, why we should all be wearing sunscreen every single day. We'll talk a little about the science of it, and we'll talk about the different types of ultraviolet radiation that we are protecting ourselves against. So let's get into it. Before we dive into the details, though, let's briefly touch upon why sunscreen is such a crucial component in our anti-aging arsenal. We all know that sun's rays can be damaging to our skin, but did you know that exposure to ultraviolet radiation, or UV radiation, is one of the leading causes of premature aging? Yes, we all hear the stories that sun exposure can cause skin cancer, but it also actually prematurely ages our skin. Those harmful UVA and UVB rays can penetrate the skin, and that can lead to, yes, an increased risk of skin cancer, but also wrinkles and age spots. But here's the good news. Sunscreen is our shield against these damaging rays. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. We're going to unveil the science behind the sunscreen. We're going to help you choose the right one for your needs and talk about some of the best practices for application and even provide some additional sun protection tips to ultimately keep your skin looking as youthful as possible and to keep the damage down to a minimum. So let's jump right in. To understand the importance of sunscreen, we need to grasp the science behind UV radiation, ultraviolet radiation, and its effects on the skin. Now here's the thing. UV radiation is divided into two main types, UVA and UVB. In a very general sense, UVA rays tend to be more responsible for the skin aging that we see, while UVB rays primarily cause sunburns. And the good news is that sunscreens work to block these harmful rays, both from the UVA and UVB, depending on the sunscreen. So let's talk a little bit more about UVA and UVB so we have a better understanding about that. Now, you can't see ultraviolet light. It's not in the visible light spectrum, but definitely it is there, as we all know, and it does have significant impacts on our skin. UVA, as I mentioned, tends to be associated with skin aging, and it tends to have a longer wavelength. UVB, as I mentioned, tends to be associated with skin burning and has a shorter wavelength. But the bottom line is that they both do harm to our skin. Unprotected exposure to both UVA and UVB damages the DNA in our skin cells that produces genetic defects or mutations that can lead to skin cancer and the premature aging. As an aside, UV rays can also cause eye damage, including cataracts and eyelid cancers, which is also why it's very important to be wearing sunglasses when you're out and about, particularly when it's really sunny. As many of us will know, UV radiation is a proven human carcinogen, and it can cause different types of skin cancers, including basal cell carcinomas, BCC, and squamous cell carcinomas, SCC. And these types of cancers are often seen in areas of the skin that are sun exposed for prolonged periods of time. Let's talk a little bit more about the UVB and the UVA facts and risks and some of the things that distinguish one type from the other. UVB tends to penetrate and damage the outermost layer of the skin. And that's why it tends to cause sun tanning, sun burning, and in severe cases, blistering. UVB is connected to the sun protection factor, or SPF, as you may see on labels of sunscreen products, and that tells you how long the sun's radiation, including some of the UVA, would take to redden your skin when using that product compared to the time without sunscreen. The UVB intensity can definitely fluctuate depending on when the sun's rays are the strongest, and it can certainly pose the highest risk late morning to mid-afternoon, from spring to fall, depending on when the sun is at its strongest. And something else that's quite interesting about UVB is that it can be filtered and it does not penetrate glass. So that's great. If you're indoors or in a car with windows up, the UVB rays do not penetrate. However, UVA, and here's one of the differences, UVA can penetrate windows and cloud cover as well, which is why it's really important to be wearing sunscreen even on cloudy days. UVA rays can cause tanning, and the shorter wavelengths of UVA can also cause sunburning. And there's no such thing as a safe or a healthy tan. UVA is also connected to broad spectrum protection that you will see on labels of sunscreen products. And while early sunscreens were only protecting against UVB, once it was understood how dangerous UVA rays were, then sunscreen manufacturers began adding the protection for both types of ultraviolet radiation. While the UVA rays are slightly less intense than UVB, they do penetrate the skin more deeply, and again, exposure can cause genetic damage to the cells, and this can lead to skin damage and ultimately some of the higher risk of skin cancer. Another interesting fact about the UVA radiation is that the UVA accounts for up to 95% of the ultraviolet radiation that reaches the Earth, and these rays maintain the same level of strength during daylight hours throughout the year. And I'll emphasize this again, that is why it is so important to be wearing sunscreen throughout the year, whether or not it is cloudy or sunny or whatever the weather is doing outside. Having talked about all of these facts about UVA and UVB, the good news is that you can enjoy the great outdoors by protecting your skin against UV exposure with broad spectrum sunscreen, as well as physical barriers such as sun-safe clothing, hats, eyewear, etc. Now let's focus on sunscreen, because that is the thing that we can take into our own hands, so to speak, and really be proactive in protecting our skin from further damage from the sun. There are two main types of sunscreens. There's physical sunscreens and there's chemical sunscreens. And a lot of sunscreens actually have ingredients of both of these. Nevertheless, let's talk about each type in a little bit more detail. Physical sunscreens are those that contain mineral ingredients such as zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. They act as a barrier on the skin, reflecting and scattering the UV rays away from the skin surface. It's basically acting like a shield. The ultraviolet radiation comes down, hits the skin. When you've got this physical barrier on, it gets deflected away, and you do not take the results. You do not have the effects of that ultraviolet radiation penetrating your skin. These physical sunscreens provide broad spectrum protection, shielding the skin from both UVA and UVB, and they tend to be quite gentle on the skin. They're generally considered suitable for sensitive skin types, as they're less likely to cause irritation or allergic reactions. They are immediately effective, so physical sunscreens start to work as soon as they are applied to the skin, making them a reliable choice for instant protection. And also there's minimal risk of degradation. These physical sunscreens are not as prone to degradation due to heat or sunlight, so their efficacy remains more consistent over time. Now let's talk a little bit about chemical sunscreens. So these typically contain organic compounds such as avobenzone, oxybenzone, or other similar chemicals. They work by absorbing the UV radiation and converting it into heat, which is then released from the skin. So that's a big difference between the chemical and the physical sunscreens. Again, physical ones act like a shield and it deflects the UV radiation away, whereas the chemical sunscreens work by absorbing the UV radiation, converting it into heat, and that is released from the skin. These chemical sunscreens also provide broad spectrum protection against UVA and UVB rays, but the level of protection may vary depending on the specific ingredients that are used. Sometimes these chemical sunscreens can be a little bit more prone to causing some irritation, and so some individuals, particularly those with a lot of skin sensitivity or allergic reactions, can react to this. And so it's important to read those labels and consider the personal sensitivities. These chemical sunscreens typically need about 20 minutes or so to absorb into the skin before they become effective. And there is some potential for degradation. So these chemical sunscreens may degrade when exposed to sunlight, reducing their effectiveness over time. However, I will say that there have been some advancements in sunscreen formulations that have addressed this issue in many of the newer products. Now, it's worth noting that a lot of the sunscreens on the market today are hybrids. They combine an element of physical and chemical sunscreen to offer protection and also some cosmetic elegance. These sunscreens aim to provide benefits of both types while minimizing their individual drawbacks. So when choosing a sunscreen, it's essential to consider your skin type, any specific sensitivities or allergies, your personal preferences with regards to the texture, the finish, the application method. There are lots of different choices out there. Ultimately, the one that's going to be best for you is the one that you use to protect your skin from the harmful effects of UV radiation. So with that being said, I hope that's given you enough motivation to make sure that you are using sunscreen on a regular basis. I encourage you to come by Anti-Aging Medical and Laser Clinic, where we have a number of different types of sunscreens, and we'd be happy to give you some personal recommendations based on your skin type and how you would be most likely to use the sunscreen in an effective and consistent manner. Thank you again for tuning in this week. It's a great pleasure to always speak with you and spend a few minutes of my time and your time chatting about these topics. We have some incredible guests coming up over the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. And again, if you are enjoying the podcast, a review in your personal and favorite podcast player would be tremendously appreciated. It's always wonderful to hear the comments from people that are listening to the podcast, and I do read each and every one of those. So thanks again. Hope you're doing well, and we'll talk again really soon. Take care, and remember, put that sunscreen on today.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Anti-Aging Insights. Stay tuned to discover more of the latest news, treatments, technologies, and developments in non-surgical cosmetic and anti-aging medicine. For more inspiration, to access the show notes, or to book an appointment with Dr. Fisher, Dr. Frame, or any of the other anti-aging professionals, please visit our website at antiagingvancouver.com. Until next time, stay inspired and live life well.